Around the examining magistrate, Monsieur Bermuthier, a whole circle of listeners had gathered. He was speaking of the mysterious affair at St. Cloud, which for a month had driven all of Paris to distraction. Everyone discussed this inexplicable crime, and no one could make any sense of it. Standing with his back to the fireplace, he enumerated the evidence, weighed the various opinions, yet drew no conclusions. Many ladies had risen from their seats to hear him better. They stood before him, eyes fixed upon his face, trembling with curiosity and fear, tormented by that insatiable need to taste the sensation of horror, a hunger that gnaws at every woman. One of them, pale as linen, seized a pause in the magistrate's discourse and cried out, "It is dreadful. It borders on the supernatural. No one will ever unravel it." "Yes, you are right," replied the judge, turning toward her. "It is quite possible that this affair will remain unsolved. As for the word supernatural, which you have just spoken, in my opinion, it does not apply here. What we have before us is a crime, cleverly conceived, cleverly executed, and surrounded by circumstances so mysterious that we have been unable to disentangle them. Yet once I had a case which truly bore a fantastic character. I was forced to leave it uninvestigated, for there was simply no way to explain it." "Oh, tell us about it," cried several ladies at once. Monsieur Bermuthier smiled with the grave smile befitting an examining magistrate, and began, "Do not imagine, however, that I could for a moment suspect any supernatural element in that affair. I believe only in natural causes. But if, when speaking of something we cannot understand, we were to use the word inexplicable instead of supernatural, it would be far better. In any case, in the matter I am about to relate, what struck and disturbed me most were the incidental, one might say preparatory, circumstances. It happened at the time when I was magistrate in Ajaccio, a little white town lying deep within a charming bay, ringed all around by lofty mountains. During my tenure there, I was most often occupied with cases concerning vendettas. Among such cases are some magnificent, savage, heroic, supremely dramatic ones. There we find the finest examples of vengeance imaginable. Instances of ancient hatreds that slumber for a time but never die, revolting stratagems, murders that swell into outright massacres, yet are regarded there as deeds of honor. For 2 years after my arrival, I heard of nothing but the price of blood, that dreadful Corsican prejudice which compels a man to avenge an insult not only upon the offender himself, but upon his descendants and all who are close to him. I saw children slain for vendetta, old men, near relatives butchered, and my mind was filled with all these horrors. One day, I learned that an Englishman had rented, for several years, a small villa deep within the bay, and had settled there with a French servant whom he had engaged while passing through Marseilles. Soon everyone began to talk about this strange lodger, who lived like a complete recluse, venturing out only to hunt or to fish. He spoke to no one, never went into town, and every morning spent 2 hours practicing his aim with pistol and rifle. Legends began to form around him. Some said he was a nobleman who had left his country for political reasons. Others claimed he was in hiding because of some dreadful crime. A few even described the details of that crime, details truly horrifying. As examining magistrate, I wished to discover something about him, but could learn nothing beyond the fact that he was called Sir John Rowell. Under that name, at least, he was known in the region. I abandoned my inquiries, though I continued to watch him closely, but observed nothing suspicious. Yet as the evil rumors about him grew, I resolved to make his acquaintance myself, and began hunting daily near his house. For a long time, no opportunity presented itself. At last, I shot a partridge almost at his very door, and as he came out of the gate at that moment, I approached, apologized for disturbing him by firing so close to his dwelling, and offered him the bird as a gift. He accepted it and thanked me politely. From then on, we began to converse, and by the end of the month, I had spoken with him 6 times. He was a tall gentleman, broad-shouldered, seemingly strong as Hercules, with red hair and a red beard. His manners were courteous, his voice quiet and calm. None of that stiffness so common among Englishmen was in him. One evening, passing by his villa, I saw him seated astride a chair in his garden. I bowed, and he invited me to come in and drink a beer. I gladly accepted. He received me with all the refined courtesy characteristic of his countrymen, spoke with great praise of France and Corsica, and assured me that he was much taken with this land and this shore. I ventured, cautiously and under the guise of friendly interest, to ask him a few questions about his life. He answered without the least reserve, telling me that he had traveled widely, Africa, India, America, and concluded with the words, "I have had many adventures, oh yes." The conversation turned to hunting. He gave me the most detailed accounts of hunting hippopotamus, tiger, elephant, even gorilla. "Those are terrible creatures," I remarked. "Oh no," he replied, smiling. "The most terrible creature is man, and I have hunted man as well. Indeed I have." He added this with a laugh, the hearty laugh of stout Englishmen, content with their lot. He then began to speak of his fine collection of weapons, and proposed that I come see them. We entered a room hung with black fabric embroidered in gold. Great flowers scattered across the dark field gleamed like fire. "That is Japanese cloth," he explained. In the middle of one broad panel, I noticed something that drew my particular attention. Upon a large square of red velvet, there was something black. I stepped closer. It was a hand, a human hand. Not the hand of a skeleton, white and clean, but black, shriveled, with red nails, bare muscles, and traces of clotted blood upon the bone, severed above the wrist as though by an axe. A heavy iron chain was driven into the hand at one end, clasping it, while the other end was fastened to the wall with massive iron rings. Rings strong enough, one might think, to hold an elephant. "What is that?" I asked. "It is my best enemy," the Englishman replied calmly, in his broken French. "He is from America." The hand was severed by a saber, scraped with a sharp stone, and dried in the sun for a whole week. "Ayo, splendid." I touched that human relic, which must have belonged to a giant. On the fingers, extraordinarily long, patches of skin still clung. It was dreadful to look upon that flayed hand. It compelled one to think of some savage vengeance. "This man must have been very strong," I remarked. "Oh, yes," answered the Englishman curtly, "but I was stronger. I fastened this chain to hold him." "But why do you need the chain now?" I asked. "Surely the hand will not escape." "Without the chain it was impossible," Sir John replied gravely. "He was always trying to run away." I glanced quickly at his face, thinking to myself, either he is mad, or this is a foolish jest. But his features told me nothing. They expressed only imperturbable calm and courtesy. I changed the subject and began to examine the weapons. Yet I noticed that on chairs in different corners of the room lay 3 loaded revolvers. One might have thought this man lived in constant fear of attack. After that I visited him several more times, then ceased to go. People grew accustomed to his presence, and the gossip about him died away. A year passed. One morning, Late in November, my servant woke me and told me that Sir John Rowell had been murdered during the night. Half an hour later, I was already in the Englishman's house, together with the police commissioner and the captain of gendarmes. Sir John's servant sat at the gate, weeping, terrified, bewildered. At first I suspected him, but it was later proved he had nothing to do with it. Search as we might, the culprit was never found. Entering Sir John's Japanese hall, I saw his body stretched upon the floor in the middle of the room. His waistcoat was torn to shreds, the sleeve of his coat ripped away. Everything showed that there had been a terrible struggle between him and his murderer. Death had come by strangulation. On the dead man's face, black and swollen, there seemed frozen an expression of indescribable horror. Between his tightly clenched teeth, something hard was caught. His neck was drenched in blood, and upon it were 5 wounds, as though made by iron nails. The police doctor, who had also been summoned, examined these wounds for a long time, and at last said, "Indeed, one might think he was strangled by a skeleton." A chill ran over my skin. I cast a quick glance at the wall, where once I had seen that dreadful, flayed hand. It was gone. The chain hung loose, dangling at one end. I bent over the murdered man and examined what he held between his teeth. It proved to be a finger from the vanished hand, bitten through at the second joint. The inspection of the body and the house explained nothing. Doors, windows, furniture, all were in order. There were 2 watchdogs in the house. Questioned neighbors testified that not one of them had barked during the night. Under interrogation, the servant declared that for the past month his master had been constantly agitated. He received many letters, and after reading them would immediately throw them into the fire. At times he was seized by fits of rage bordering on madness. Then he would snatch up a whip and lash the shriveled hand with fury. It had still hung on the wall the evening before the murder, and disappeared only that night. Asked at what hour Sir John usually went to bed, the servant replied that he always retired very late and invariably locked himself in. A loaded pistol always lay beside his bed. Often at night, he would begin speaking loudly, as though quarreling with someone. But on that night, all was quiet. The servant heard no sound, and only in the morning, entering the hall to open the windows as usual, found his master lying on the floor. Asked whether he suspected anyone, he answered that he had not the slightest idea whom to suspect. I reported to the commissioner and the other authorities what I knew of the deceased. The most thorough investigation was ordered. Agents were dispatched to every corner of the island, but nothing was discovered. 3 months later, I had a dreadful dream. It seemed to me that the terrible hand was crawling along the curtains of my bed, like a spider or a scorpion. 3 times I awoke, and 3 times, falling asleep again, I saw the same vision. The hand scuttling about my room, now on the walls, now on the floor, now across the furniture, moving its fingers like claws. The next morning it was brought to my lodgings. Asked whence it came, they told me it had been found in the cemetery, upon the grave of Sir John Rowell. I forgot to mention that he had been buried in the local cemetery, since no relatives could be found. 1 finger was missing from the hand, the forefinger. That, gentlemen, is all I have to tell you. I know nothing more. The ladies, listening to this tale, grew pale and trembled. When the judge finished, one of them cried out, "But that is no conclusion, no explanation. We shall not sleep all night unless you tell us at least your opinion of what truly happened." The judge smiled with stern composure. "If I tell you my opinion, mesdames," he replied, "I shall spoil everything for you, depriving you of the chance to dream delightfully frightful dreams. I think, quite simply, that the owner of the severed hand was alive, and that he came to reclaim it from Sir John with his remaining hand. The only interesting question is how he managed it, for indeed the trick was most cleverly played. "No, that can hardly be admitted," said one of the ladies, with a dissatisfied air. "Well, then, I knew my explanation would not please you," answered the judge, smiling.